Scientific method, a couple things you can rely on. One way you can remember is the acronym SPERM. State the problem, predict, experiment, results, and make conclusions. So a lot of people did this straight on their inquiry lab. Just a reminder, the scientific method is not always the same every time. So we present it as a linear route, but the actuality is it's actually quite complicated. A good resource is Understanding Science through UC Berkeley. It shows a lot of ways that you can see that science is actually in circles. You make a hypothesis, you revise it, so science is actually messy. And you'll see this a lot with the inquiry projects. You'll think you have a procedure, you'll try it, it won't work, so you'll have to fix it. Science is actually messy. It's not this clean-cut way that you do it. Just to define a couple other words that we didn't touch on, things like variables. So I'm going to touch on some things like the variables. So again, independent researcher changes. Dependent is what you measure. So if you were to do this on a graph, your x-axis would be your independent variable, and your y would be your dependent. So what would be an example of this? The amount of water you give a plant, and how tall it grew. Centimeters. Don't forget your units, and graphs also need titles. But we'll get into some of the specifics of good graphing technique later. So another thing you want to make sure you include is a control. So what's the control and what's the purpose? So a control, it's a mechanism of standardization. So I teach a class called AP Bio. You want to make sure you have the same AP Bio all the way around. So you set up standards. You try to eliminate outside variables. So for example, when you're growing the plants, you want to make sure the same type of pea plant and roses, you want to eliminate excess variables. You want to keep things the same. So those are variables. In this class, there will be 3 types of lab reports. So the first one you're already familiar with, it's the standard in a notebook. So in the lab notebook, this is where you kind of glue, you hit all major parts, so major procedures, hypothesis, and so forth. That's pretty standard. You've been doing that one for a long time, making sure you glue and keep it, numbering the pages. The second format we're going to talk about is a formal rewrite. So a formal rewrite is you take your lab and you set it up as if you were to send it to a publisher. So a formal article, we'll read some of these as part of the current events portion of this class, but you'll set it up and send it as if it was to send to a scientific journal. So I'll provide a handout on the specifics of what that would look like, but this would mean things like having your title, your institution, so your published work. You would have a 2-column system. Format, and the new thing would have an abstract. So the abstract would be a new part, and this thing, the abstract has to do with a summary of your work. These things will also be peer reviewed. So before you can submit it, you have to have someone else in the class take the time to look at it, peer review and critique. And the last thing is you're going to have to do a literature review, meaning you looked at other papers that are similar or other writers in this class and do a literature review to complete a formal write-up. So these will occur once a quarter. And are done to keep you on the up and up, take a lab we've done, and make it even better. The last lab report will be a poster. So a poster presentation is when you've taken your work and you're now going to present it to peers. This tends to happen a lot with our inquiry work. And our first presentation that we're actually going to do is we're going to model it. We're going to go ahead and do it with the plant lab from the summer. So the way we do this is normally it's a trifold. So think of like science fair, trifold. And the format will be set up. We'll have a handout. But the idea is you're going to share your work with others. This is especially important in inquiry because you're finding out something that no one else has. So for example, if Victor worked on light colors as the variable and someone else worked on, for example, light colors versus light intensity. You'd want to share information and see if there's a correlation or relationship between the two. So that sums up our 3 types of ways that we're going to share information with each other. We have a informal notebook report, a formal rewrite, and a poster presentation.